Hey y'all, it's Stephen Van Kampen-Lewis, and I got back from the American Orchid Society members meeting, which was in Annapolis, Maryland this year, and it happened in basically the middle of April, and it was a lot of fun. First of all, I have never been to Annapolis, and it's a really cool place. The weather was okay; it was kind of rainy and cold for a couple of days, but I was there for about 4 days, and it was just a lot of fun. There was a lot of events. It was great to see lots of my orchid growing friends from around the country, actually around the world. You know, some folks that I've known for a long time, and other folks that I've known online only, and then got to see them in person. And then just the cool stuff that we got to do. So I ended up getting there on a Wednesday night, and so my sort of fun activities, I guess, really started on Thursday morning. And at first, there was a judging committee meeting where all the what we call JC or judging committee chairs from around the country kind of meet and vote on things and talk about things and discuss proposals and how to make the judging system better, of course. Immediately after that, we went to the Smithsonian Botanical Gardens and got to see a behind the scenes tour of their orchid houses and some of their other greenhouses. And that was really, really amazing. Unfortunately, you know, as soon as we got there, one of the first things that they said is, you know, we can't have you posting to social media. It's a whole thing. I was ready to take a bunch of videos and photos and show you all what's going on back there, but unfortunately, I was not allowed to. So this is the only picture I got. This is actually us sort of all getting an introduction and them saying no photos of the greenhouses and the plants inside. So, you know, that said, if you go to YouTube and you do a search for Smithsonian Orchid, really just Smithsonian Orchid or Smithsonian Orchid Collection, you'll see a bunch of videos and you can see what an official behind the scenes tour is allowed to do. There's a gal named Summer Rain Oaks who is able to walk around in video, and it's a really amazing place. Definitely worth checking out if you get a chance. On the same day, we got to go to the U.S. Capitol Botanical Gardens, and I think I may have gotten that name wrong, but that I will show you video of. Some videos of the orchid collection out front. We didn't see behind the scenes stuff, but out front where the visitors are, there's a lot of cool stuff, and I'll show you that here in a second. There was also judging. We got to judge some plants. There was a bunch of plants, and they were broken up into different teams. My team got to judge and award an AM, an Award of Merit, which is a quality award to a plant, and I'll show you that in a sec. And then there were vendors. You know, there was 4 vendors there, and I'll show you a video of sort of some of the highlights from those. The North American Orchid Conservation Center had a bunch of lecturers and a bunch of lectures we got to see. And then there were workshops, hands-on workshops. Jay Balchan taught one on mounting orchids. Ron McHatton did a discussion on orchid viruses, and they did a hands-on session with the Agdia test strips. So I'm not going to spend a whole crazy amount of time. In fact, I'm trying to keep this video to like 15 minutes so that y'all don't get bored. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a few of the photos of the various things, including the auction that I didn't mention. That was kind of cool. And then I'll show you the vendors, their plants, and I'll show you the display at the Botanical Garden. So let's get started. I want to make this quick, and I want to show you really the highlights of all the cool stuff we get to do. So like I just mentioned, you know, my trip, my adventures that I can show you after I arrived. So this is me leaving San Antonio, and then of course I landed in Maryland that evening, and we went to the Smithsonian. And after the Smithsonian, we went to the Botanical Gardens, and I didn't realize that it's sort of smushed between the House of Representatives and the Capitol building there. So as we were pulling up, you know, everybody on the buses who didn't realize this was like, hey, this is weird. We're suddenly at the Capitol. And there's me, of course, we got out of the bus right at the Capitol building and then walked over to the Botanical Garden. And as we're walking up, there are these Blatilla striatas popping out of the ground. So this is not even inside the Botanical Garden. This is outside. And so we were immediately greeted with orchids, and And this is the building itself. It's kind of austere. It's actually very nice architecture, and it's I think it's about 100 years old. But you get in there, and it's just this massive, massive room, as you can see here. And this is not even the main greenhouse. This is sort of the introductory room, and then you kind of walk through a circuit around the various greenhouses. And this is our group. This is not representative of everybody that was at the AOS members meeting, but only a sort of the early birds who registered first and were able to get onto this really cool bus tour. And then we were broken up into like 3 or 4 groups, and then we were taken around to show the various greenhouses, and there were just orchids everywhere. And I was really impressed by the orchids I saw. You know, that first shot there was a bunch of hybrid phals, and I kind of assumed that we would just see random hybrid phals and sort of generic things that I'm not personally interested in, but I was really impressed by the number of species that they were growing. And the displays themselves were really nice. Like we just walked past several quote unquote orchid trees, which are these sort of artificially designed structures with cork bark added and orchids kind of tucked into pots. And then there were these different displays. So this was a display from the Botanical Garden itself, and you can see that there's dendrobiums, there are oncidiums, encyclias. You see some purple vandas in the background. A lot of these were species, some were not. There's some brassias that we're looking at right here, and the sarcochilus up here on the top left. And I got a pretty good photo of this one. You can see this is Hartmannii from Eastern Australia. And this is just one of the displays. There were a bunch of these, and there were not only some of these displays that just had random orchids growing in, but there were themed displays as well. And I'll show you that in a sec. This was Aspasia. I can't remember which species that was, but you know, it was a good assortment of orchids in this very contained small space. And like I said, there was a bunch of those. In fact, next to the Botanical Garden one was one that was put up by the Smithsonian. So I do get to show you some of their orchids, just not behind the scenes. These are the ones out front. And there's some vandas and some phaeus. And you can see also some oncidium types. And there was this cool terrestrial down here that I'd never heard of, never seen before. Polexia laxa. I assume it's grown mostly for the foliage, because the flowers are these sort of small, nondescript brown things, but the leaves are really interesting looking. And then you can see there's some lycast and some oncidium hybrids, some more Paphiopedilums, and I don't recall if those were species or not. There's this big Polystachya that looked a lot like Polystachya neobenthamia, but sort of larger flowers on much longer stems there, as you can see. But still these sort of clumps of white flowers at the end of the spike. And lots of Laturia dendrobiums, actually. There were Laturia dendrobiums right there. And then I'll show you a few more here in a second on these sort of orchid trees. And you have this reed stem epidendrum. I don't recall if that was a species or if that was a complex hybrid, but it was a really good display of different genera from different parts of the world. And here's a Grammatophyllum. And it was really, really an interesting display. And I mentioned that there were themed exhibits, and this is one of them. This was a themed exhibit on sexual deception. And if you want, you can pause this and read what they have to say about it. But these were all Lepanthes. These are not something that I'm super familiar with. We don't really see a whole lot of Lepanthes here in Texas. Of course, Lepanthes like sort of cooler conditions than what we typically have, but you can see they're cool. They have these really interesting flowers, and some of the Lepanthes have larger blooms, but these are the ones that were kind of small. And again, the theme was sexual deception here, and these are the types of flowers that fool the pollinators into believing that they are copulating with a member of their own species, and of course they're just pollinating the flowers. I mentioned Laturia dendrobiums. These were In the same sort of front room, this is before we even got to their orchid room, and you can see we walked past a Roy Tokunaga. This is Dendrobium atroviolaceum, and there was a whole like artificial tree of them. I think this was another Roy Tokunaga. And then we have these Miltonias, of course. Miltonias are much cooler growing than those Laturia dendrobiums we just saw, but it was a good mixture of different types and some Phalaenopsis type dendrobiums. And to be honest, I thought it was going to be hybrid Miltonias and things like this, Oncidium Sherry Baby, and some of the just random phals. And these were nice displays, of course, but this is the type of thing that I was expecting throughout the entire area, including in the Smithsonian. And luckily, I was really, really wrong. And it was great to see their dedication and interest in species orchids. And of course, these are not species orchids; these are hybrid phals. But you'll get what I'm seeing sort of in the next section where we walk into the orchid room itself, and it's almost entirely species. And that said, this was a really cool hybrid Laturia with a lot of color. It was Mini Snowflake by Roy Tokunaga. And I don't know if that's a named hybrid at this point or not, but that's what the tag said. This was a giant vanilla. So every time somebody wants to grow vanilla in their indoor exhibit or indoor area, I think of vanillas that size, and I just kind of chuckle to myself. And naturally, I say don't do it in my head, but they do. There's Jay Balchan, at least the back of him. And this is the orchid room, and a bunch of our orchid friends and folks from the AOS members meeting, lots of judges, and this was such a great room. This is Certicilum, and I'm not super familiar with Certicilums, so I can't speak to where they're from or what they do, but this is an encyclia. These encyclias, really small flowers, really intensely colored, and a lot of them, and they smell pretty nice. And this whole room is just full of a series of orchids from all over the world. So there wasn't necessarily a theme of a certain group of orchids or from a certain latitude or country. This was universally orchids from all around the world, and you can see some more of these Laturia dendrobiums, as well as there's a Scaphocepalum, and of course Scaphocepalum have really tiny flowers, so I had to get my hand in there. And actually, this is one of the larger ones. A lot of the Scaphocepalums we see are, half that size. So still, the camera had a little bit of difficulty focusing on that. Also, they had this sort of artificial log going across with lots of Oncidiums and Encyclias sitting on it. And there were a bunch of hanging baskets, as you can see. And then some paphs there on the ground. I think this one was longifolium, though I don't recall, but it had a really nice green pouch, and growing in a situation where it would typically grow on the forest floor in the wild, which is normal. This is a really cool Gongora, and Gongora is actually one of the groups that I miss from when I used to grow them a lot in Hawaii, but I don't grow them here in Texas anymore. And of course, we had other hanging things, including this one that's fragrant. I can't remember exactly what it was, and I'm looking at the tag and I can't really see it there. But there were some large ones and some small ones, and there's a Stellus. I don't think I zoomed in on that one. That one was too difficult to see. And of course, there was this Restrepia, which is a group that I've become more interested in lately. So it was great to see one of those. And then we had this other, sort of the other side of the orchid room, lots of plants hanging on mounts, including a bunch of dendrobiums. And here is a Paraphalaenopsis, some more dendrobiums. This is Phalaenopsis philippinensis, which is not super common in collections, it seems like. You see a lot of their hybrids, the big white Phalaenopsis, but you can see there are just a multitude of different orchids, and I wasn't sure which ones to get a video of, and so here's Aspasia. Again, we saw an Aspasia a little earlier in the main room, and here's this Phragmipedium. This is a Phragmipedium that's a hybrid, so not everything in here was a species. This is Dendrobium polyphyllum, I believe, poly something. It's one of the fuzzy Laturia dendrobiums, and they get pretty large. This was a really cool looking encyclia. It was nicely scented. I think this is a Hartmannii, and such great color and such a great scent. And if this is one that I see, I'm probably going to grab it and try and grow it for myself. And here's a large specimen-sized Maxillaria with a large specimen-sized Oncidium right next to it. I don't recall if this was Sphacelatum or not, or another one, but you can see these are really big, healthy, old plants that have obviously received. Oh, it's a Certicilum. No, that can't be right. That was Oncidium. This is Phalaenopsis mannii, one of the albums or albas. I think most of the mannii that we see these days are typically the dark variety. So it was cool to see one of these lighter ones. And here's a species, Vanda. I don't recall exactly which one you can see there on the screen, but long roots. And lots more Vandas, actually, with long roots. I don't think I got the name on this one, but this is one of the more fragrant ones that you see often being sold at Redland or Tamiami. It seems like a lot of the Florida vendors have those really nicely scented Vanda species, and this was a Vanda hybrid here. Again, oh, never mind, that's Denisoniana. That's not a hybrid, but it is pretty commonly grown these days. And of course, there's the vendors. Now, I think, most of us who've gone to a lot of shows are used to seeing just jam-packed amounts of vendors, but this was really nice. I think the folks that put this together realized this is not going to be a huge show with tons and tons of people. So there were 4 vendors, and this first one here is Orcadom, and this is a group from the Dominican Republic, and their owner is Nancy Mountford, and she had a pretty wide variety of stuff. She had some really cool Tolumnias and some flasks and some Oncidiums and a couple phals. But one of the things that she actually brought was the Tolumnia that we ended up awarding, and I'll show that here in a sec. But she had a bunch of species Tolumnias and some hybrids, and you can see some interesting Phalaenopsis here as well. And then, to the left of Orchidom, we got over to J&L Orchids. And so, this display is not huge, but they sell minis. So this was actually a huge number of orchids, all sort of jammed into a single area. And there were some Laturia dendrobiums. I think those were the largest ones that they were selling. But then they had these little mini bulbophyllums and just so many different genera from all over the world packed into one teeny tiny little area. And this was another bulbophyllum, and it had these big wispy, I can't remember the names they look like hairs coming off of the lip there, and if you get up close you can kind of blow on them, and they move in the wind. And of course the labellum that move, or the hinge labellum I should say, is one of the defining characteristics of bulbophyllums. And they had these Schoenorchis scolopendra, and of course scolopendra is the genus name for centipede. And when you kind of zoom in on this, you can see A, that these are actually in spike. You see little teeny buds coming out there, and B, they do kind of actually look like centipedes. And I get to see some of these monstrous foot-long centipedes here in Texas, and I used to see them in Hawaii too, and they're kind of freaky, especially since they have these massive pinchers on their back that can really hurt you. And one of the things that I was looking for was Restrepia. I feel like I may have been bitten a little bit by the Restrepia bug, but I didn't find any here, so I didn't buy anything from J&L, but I did get to see just a wide variety of some of these super colorful red miniature things, and some of the larger ones. Here's this Phalaenopsis schilleriana, which of course is the backbone for so much of the modern sort of large Phalaenopsis breeding. And most of these things, as you can see, were not in bloom. There was a small handful, but most of the things that were there were, it's spring, so they would probably be blooming here in the next couple months. But some of the things that were blooming did actually include there was one dendrobium. This is a Cuthbertsonii hybrid. I didn't see that one blooming, but this is Oncidium crasseum, and that's a little teeny one. And they had some of these small Masdevallias blooming, which were always interesting to see. And I think they said most of these were intermediate growing, so I kind of thought about grabbing one for the terrarium. But again, I'm holding out. And in fact, this Cochleanthes discolor kind of caught my attention. I believe that one's fragrant, but I don't remember for sure. But again, if you're into minis, J&L has so much cool stuff, and I was really tempted to buy something, but I didn't end up pulling the trigger. And then of course Woodstream Orchids was there also. In fact, these were all vendors from the DC area, and Woodstream Orchids had, if you know them, you know that they're well known for their Paphiopedilums and Phragmipediums, and they had some really nice ones. I don't really grow these. These aren't my thing, but I get to award a lot quite often actually, and so it's really nice to see some really good examples. And this was Jason Fisher, and I think this one got an FCC some years ago, and you can see just that brilliant red, why it was awarded. And of course here are a bunch of flasks. So if you were into PAFs or frags, this was definitely the table for you. And this is Needmore Orchids, and Needmore is a single word, and the owner's name is Sarah Herdell or Herdell. I don't recall, but it was good to meet her. I've been on her orchid list for a long time now. I just haven't pulled the trigger on any Habanarias, but I was able to get 2 of her Habanarias that I'm pretty excited about. They are these. One of them is Habenaria rhodokyla, and it is a neon red one. And then another one that's bowerbird, and it's a rhodokyla hybrid, I think. This is a group that I want to get into more, and you can see there's a wide variety of colors as we're going through. There's lots of oranges and whites and pinks and reds. And I did a video with Nick Rust, who has a lot of Habanarias himself and sells quite a few also. And it was great to chat with him and learn more about how to grow these. So now I actually have 2 Habanarias that I'm going to cut my teeth on. And I think Sarah had one of the longest lines at her booth. I think she had a pretty good rush of folks early on as soon as the vendors opened, and I was able to take this video when things quieted down a little bit, but she had quite a few of her plants. And this video is getting a little long in the tooth, and so I'm just going to wrap it up with a few odds and ends. This is that Tolumnia that we awarded an AM, and here's some lecturers from the different folks that were there. And finally, this was the auction, and this is a massive Peristeria alata, and one of the many, many, many cool things that a lot of great vendors donated and were sold off. And it was just a lot of fun. So I really encourage everyone to go to these AOS members meetings, have a good time, and I will talk to you later. Bye.